Hey Gear Seekers, I'm Nick. This year at Computex, Asus had quite a few products that I felt flew a little bit under the radar, and I wanted to show you guys what they were. Basically what happened was I got sick at the end of Computex and I didn't get to go back and film everything that I wanted to film, but because I filmed a bit of the B-roll and everything for these products, I thought it was worth mentioning because I found them interesting. We're gonna take a look at some networking gear, but before that, here's a word from our Computex sponsors, which just so happens to be Asus. Our Computex Taipei 2023 coverage is proudly brought to you by Asus and ROG, the Republic of Gamers. You can find links to their products in the video description. I'm sure you guys are familiar with Asus's routers over the years, especially the ROG ones, the ones that look like little spaceships, but one thing I didn't really know that they did, or I kind of had an idea, was they do enterprise networking gear, and they've got a bunch of new access points and PoE switches, which you guys might find interesting. And the reason why I'm talking about this is because if you don't know, we at home here in the Gear Seeker studio, we use Ubiquiti gear for all of that. And one of the reasons why we use that gear is because it's a centrally managed system. And that's something that I personally find very handy, especially if something goes offline. It's very, very easy to figure out what is going on. And Asus has kind of worked on something similar. So you can provision your devices on your phone or through the web portal, but kind of the way that a Dream Machine Pro would work without having that dedicated piece of hardware. It's essentially just connected through an app on your phone. That's pretty handy, especially if you've got large deployments of lots of access points, which leads into the first thing that I thought was interesting. Something I didn't realize that they made. They've got a new switch called the Expert Wi-Fi EBR63, and this is a gigabit VPN router. This also provides PoE power to power other devices on your network as well. So if you've got some access points that require PoE, they don't even have to be Asus, but you know, like the whole idea for their new system is just to have everything integrated into their own ecosystem. But this will power your wireless access points and give you some type of central management interface as well. These new wired routers that they've got have USB on them, so you can plug in your phone to use it as a type of redundancy. Let's say your internet goes down and you've got a small business and everyone needs to be back on the internet. You can plug your phone into tethered mode, into the USB port, and you can be back online. You can also get other things like USB modems and that kind of stuff to plug into that as well. So it does offer a type of redundancy. Obviously not for crazy enterprise grade redundancy, but it does have a quick and easy solution for redundancy there. Not only that, it's got multiple WAN ports. So let's say you had a connection coming in from one provider and another provider. You can either bond them, you can load balance them, or set it up in redundancy as well. So I just thought that was interesting because, you know, Asus does make networking gear, but I just didn't know that they made this type of networking gear, right? They've also got the EBP15, which is a pure PoE switch. It's also a managed switch too, so you can change things like VLANs and routing and all of that stuff on it as well. But I thought this one was worth mentioning as well because from what I can tell, this isn't going to be very expensive, and cheap 5-port gigabit PoE switches can kind of be expensive depending on who you buy it from. But yeah, this one was just a quick one I thought I'd chuck in just to show they got these dedicated PoE switches as well. Like, this networking stuff is interesting to me, and the only reason I'm sharing it is because maybe you will find this interesting for your own setup, so you guys know that there's other options out there. Like Ubiquiti, I know I keep coming back to them, but that's because that's what we use here. They've got dedicated access points like the Expert Wi-Fi EBR63, and this works in the same way as any of these other access points. They require PoE power. This is dual band Wi-Fi 6, so you're getting almost the best speeds possible at the moment, although we are slowly transitioning into Wi-Fi 7 devices, as we saw with Computex, and a lot of motherboards are now adding that functionality. Anyway, I don't want to get too off track here, but we do have these new access points, and we were lucky enough to shoot some B-roll of these so we could get a closer look and a bit of a hands-on with them. But I think this is interesting because if the price is right from ASUS with these bits of hardware alone, I think it could be quite competitive and good for small to medium-sized businesses who don't need a whole stack of networking gear, but need a good enough solution to provide Wi-Fi in the workplace. So let's say you need 3 access points to cover your office space. Something like this can be good if the price is right. Now, here's the other thing. I have no idea about pricing for any of this gear, right? So I'm just sharing stuff that I found that we got to film that we didn't get back to get more info on. Does that make sense? Hopefully that makes sense. But if you're not looking at deploying a whole bunch of individual access points that have their own backhaul connections to the rest of your network, there is something that I thought was interesting as well. They've got a new mesh wireless system called the Xray Wifi EBM68, and essentially it's kind of like the traditional mesh Wi-Fi devices that you've seen. However, they're claiming that their management interface is one of the best ones in the industry at the moment. I can't comment on it because I just haven't used it, but I thought this one was worth mentioning because we do get comments quite a bit on our networking content about mesh Wi-Fi setups and what could be a viable solution. And again, if the price is right with something like the EBM68, it could be quite competitive. It is a full Wi-Fi 6 system, and from what I can tell, you get 2 devices if you buy something like this, but I'm not sure about how many devices you can use and mesh together. It's probably some ridiculous amount as it is anyway, but I thought this one was worth mentioning mainly because they talk about this being super easy to deploy with their new Expert Wi-Fi app that's on Android and iOS, right? So for me personally, when we were in Taiwan for Computex, I needed to get access to something on our network, but I forgot what the internal IP address was and the host name was for one of the devices. And like the Expert Wi-Fi software, Ubiquity's got something quite similar, and I logged in on my phone. I could get the details and I could get on with what I needed to do. Basically, what happened was I forgot to get a thumbnail off the network that Claire had made before we left. But yeah, anyway, lastly, as I mentioned at the start of the video, you guys are probably familiar with the Asus ROG routers that look like spaceships. They've got something using a similar idea called the EBR63, and it's got 4 antennas for dual band Wi-Fi 6. And the reason why this one was worth mentioning is, again, it uses that Expert Wi-Fi software from your phone, but this is a centralized solution. It's also got backup WAN with over USB, like I mentioned with the wired routers. But yeah, all of this new gear from ASUS is looking pretty interesting. At least I think it's pretty interesting, especially with a management application on your phone. Now, if you're not super versed in networks, you might not know how useful this can be, and as I mentioned before, this is something that I use, and the fact that ASUS is looking more at this enterprisey solution, it's interesting. It's interesting. The last thing I wanted to mention about some of the stuff that we saw that we didn't get to finish filming was they had a whole bunch of ProArt gear, which I didn't know that they made. They had a ProArt GPU, which looked really, really cool. They also had a ProArt case. They didn't give us many details on the ProArt case, but it looks really cool. And I wasn't able to move the case around when we were at ASUS HQ to get a closer look, but I moved around the case. I couldn't get the camera in there, but it's looking pretty interesting, and it was a concept as well. So I'd like to see where they go with ProArt cases. And the other thing was they had a ProArt liquid cooler, which I don't think I saw anywhere else at Computex. I could be wrong, but this also looked pretty interesting. I am very interested to see what they do with the ProArt stuff, considering it was just motherboards and some monitors, but it looks like they're kind of branching out a bit more into more of a TUF-like or an ROG brand. Let us know what you think about ProArt PCs. Like, I dig the aesthetic personally. I love that black and gold, understated, no RGB kind of look. More of this, please. I think that's just about going to do it for our Computex 2023 coverage. Thank you guys so very much for tuning into all this content. I know this one is a little bit later. Claire and I got the spicy cough at the end of Computex, so we've been offline for a couple days. I'm still feeling pretty rubbish, but I wanted to strike while the iron was still lukewarm and give you guys the last of our Computex content for the year. So from Claire and I, to you guys out there, again, thank you so much for sharing this Computex journey with us, and we will catch you next year at the next show, hopefully, and we'll try not to get sick this time. I'm your boy Nick with Gear Seekers. You peak, we seek, and yeah, catch you next time. We've got lots of cool videos coming up in the next week of all cool little things that I found, and I bought some retro hardware in Taiwan, so maybe a retro build's coming up soon as well. Thanks for watching.